you condemn Israel? Your answer should be an unflinching yes.
It's so obvious!
Israel is on its final stages of committing an ethnic cleansing campaign. A genocide. We're using the G word here. I think at this point, if you're discussing Israel in a way that does not include the phrase genocide, you are completely devoid of reality. Since October 7, 2023, people who support Palestinian cause or anti-Zionist are usually met with a fundamental litmus test question. Do you condemn Hamas for what happened on October 7th? Or maybe even a more blanket version of that question. And usually the answer to that kind of question is, yes, I condemn the violence that took place on October 7, 2023, but Israel is an apartheid state that has existed on stolen land for over 70 plus years. However, that's a bit of a winded statement, isn't it? It requires you to say a full sentence. And Zionists don't have the attention span for a full sentence. They just want you to say, yes, I condemn Hamas.
Will you now take the opportunity to condemn what Hamas did on October the 7th? Final, I only ask you one more time.
22 Arab states convened at the beginning of this, including my state, my government, and they condemned.
Do you personally condemn it?
They condemned the killing of civilians from all sides.
Right.
You know what?
Not all sides.
No, from all sides.
No, do you condemn what happened on October the 7th? Why are you so reluctant to condemn it?
You asked.
You were the one last night demanding people condemn things.
I'll tell you why. I would be the first to condemn. If I ever saw you asking an Israeli official to condemn, did you ask the ambassador to condemn all the atrocities?
The nuance that is necessary to talk about this is that October 7th should have never happened. There have been many times where the Palestinian people have attempted to make a diplomatic peace treaty with the nation state of Israel, to which every time Israel has not only refused, but has also reciprocated that offer with more state-sanctioned violence. In 1988, the Palestinian Liberation Organization extended an olive branch to the Israeli government. The PLO met with the United Nations Security Council to discuss Resolution 242 and 338. The PLO complied with the demands, stating that Israel had a right to exist, and it even renounced terrorism as a political strategy. And in return, they just wanted independence, all while compromising on ideological goals to take back the entirety of the region of Levant. Then Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Shamir, retaliated, declaring on the state-run radio station, "It's an additional step in the war of Arab terrorist organizations against the existence and independence of the State of Israel, and we will respond accordingly. We will continue as long as it's necessary to convince all the nations of the world that conferring recognition abets this creature, meaning assistance in the elimination of the State of Israel." As a result, the Israeli government cut off electricity to Palestinian communities, instated an indefinite curfew on 2 refugee camps in dozens of major towns, and completely sealed off the West Bank. All of this resulted in 12 Palestinians being wounded by soldiers in Gaza, 3 of which were confirmed by the IDF themselves. Why aren't Zionists condemning this? In 2002, the entire Arab League, including Algeria, Egypt, Morocco, Sudan, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Somalia, Iraq, Comoros, Djibouti, Qatar, Oman, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Yemen, Bahrain, Tunisia, Mauritania, Libya, and even Saudi Arabia all met with Palestine in Beirut to devise the Arab Peace Initiative. What did Israel do in response to this multinational offer? Well, then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon refused to even discuss the initiative, calling it a non-starter. Around this time, Sharon launched Operation Defensive Shield, which was yet another violent military reoccupation of the West Bank. And according to the United Nations, this resulted in 497 Palestinians killed. Why aren't Zionists condemning this? What about in 2008, when Hamas enforced a ceasefire from June to November of that year, even policing the other resistance organizations to keep the peace? Regardless of the truce going into effect, Israel coercively enforced a blockade on Gaza, restricting the import of goods and movements in the region. Later, on November 4th of that same year, Israel broke the ceasefire by conducting a raid, killing 6 Hamas fighters with no Israeli casualties or injuries reported. Why aren't Zionists condemning this? Because it seems like every single time Palestinians and even Hamas have made some level of effort to establish peace with a settler colonial nation state that is truly hell-bent on conquest for land and the extermination of people who live there, they get burnt in the end. This paints a much sharper picture of the violence that took place on October 7th because Israel had took no part in preventing that attack from happening. The instances which I've highlighted is truly only scratching the surface, meaning that October 7th was the result of having no other option. So obviously nobody should have died on October 7th, but October 7th shouldn't have happened to begin with, especially since we now know, according to the New York Times, they reported that the IDF knew about the attack that was going to happen October 7, 2023, a year in advance. The IDF let October 7, 2023 at the music festival happen. I don't know how else to spell it out for you.
The U.S. backed Israel's decision to go to war in Gaza after the October 7th attacks. But more than 660 days later, American support for Israel is shaky, in part because they're seeing the images of Palestinians who don't have food and who are dying. Percent of Americans supported the war at the beginning, but now only 32% do. 60% say they disapprove of the war. And Netanyahu's approval rating among Americans is just 29%, the lowest ever since Gallup started asking the question back in 1998.
And not to mention, our government, the United States, no matter which party you pick from, they both are allied with the Israeli nation state, and they continue to get AIPAC money over and over and over again. It seems money talks because a lot of these politicians, especially on the Democratic Party side, they still do a fuck ton of lip service for the Israeli nation state.
More than half of Senate Democrats just voted to oppose the sale of over $500 million worth of U.S. bombs and guns to Israel. Would you have voted to oppose sending those weapons?
I think we need to insist that if American taxpayer funding is going to weaponry that is going to Israel, that is not going to things that shock the conscience. And look, we see images every day that shock the conscience. So much of this is complicated. So much of this is complicated.
Even Democratic Socialist sweetheart Zoran Mamdani even recently stated that Israel has a right to exist.
Do you believe in a Jewish state of Israel?
I believe Israel has the right to exist.
Not
As a Jewish state?
No,
As a state with equal rights.
No, Israel does not have a right to exist. I mean, hell, America doesn't have a right to exist either. Both are empires that are built on stolen land. Both use your taxpayer dollars to inflict state-sanctioned violence and imperialism upon its own people in which they govern over. And in many cases, other people from other countries, which these countries, Israel and the United States, wants to seek and reap the labor and resources from. Think about Israel's actions in the last, 2 years. Think about Israel's reputation and how it has slowly sunk to the bottom. Israel is pretty much just doing America shit that has been going on for the last 500 years, except the only difference is that it is live streamed on social media. That means we have the benefit of seeing this horrific genocidal atrocity that's going on in that part of the world. Imagine if we had Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and all these social media platforms capable of live streaming a genocide back in the last 500 years. Do you think public perception of the U.S. colonizers and settlers would be favorable?
We see images every day that shock the conscience.
I don't think so. I think people would cognitively be opposed to it. Of course they would be. And when you point out this fundamental crack in the so-called American dream and U.S. patriotism and Israeli nationalism, yeah, it starts to really shake Zionists and U.S. patriots to their core. Look at Pete Buttigieg, for example.
But what's not complicated is that if a child is starving because of a choice made by a government, that is unconscionable.
He is the pick for the Democratic Party 2028 presidential campaign.
And I think especially including voices who care about Israel, who believe in Israel's right to exist, who have stood with Israel in response to the unbelievable cruelty and terrorism of October 7th.
Nowhere does he mention that a genocide is taking place with our government's taxpayer dollars.
What's the definition of a genocide?
The deliberate attempt to exterminate a people. What Israel's doing.
I think there's a reason why so many of those voices are speaking up now too, because this is not just something that is on its face and in itself a moral catastrophe. It is also a catastrophe for Israel for the long run.
Poor fucking Israel. You know Israel has free healthcare for all of the conscripted soldiers of the IDF? That means they get free healthcare with our taxpayer dollars while we don't get free healthcare.
So how can you justify taking healthcare away from 78,000 Nebraskans?
If you are able to work and you're 28 years old and you choose not to work, you don't get free health care in America.
Most Americans want is to have an opportunity to walk away from their private plan, to have that, what I call Medicare for all who want it alternative, but also to be able to keep their private plan if they would prefer. And I think that's the right answer, especially when you do the math and realize it's also an answer that is paid for. Unlike the Medicare for all, whether you want it or not plans, that still have this giant question mark over how it's supposed to work. I think that's the right answer.
But while the Democratic Party is waffling for the nation-state of Israel, Marjorie Taylor Greene proposed a bill that would stop the funding of Israel's weaponry. The purpose of this bill was pretty straightforward.
My amendment would strike $500 million in funding for nuclear-armed Israel's missile defense system.
Marjorie Taylor Greene is one of the most psychopathic motherfuckers in Congress. She very specifically does not give a fuck about Jews. She blames the California wildfires on Jewish space lasers. Unfortunately, and predictably, given our membership of Congress, it got vetoed. But you all know one of the people who didn't vote for this bill? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And not only did she vote against this, where Palestinian Congressperson Rashida Tlaib did vote for this bill, she doubled down. Rashida Tlaib is not a Republican. She is not MAGA, and more importantly, she does not support Marjorie Taylor Greene. But what it does mean is that she supports a ceasefire. She supports less weapons going to Israel. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez let $500 million go to Israel. So one of the most popular people in the Democratic Party just made a fucking anti-Semitic psychopath sound somewhat reasonable. Bitch, that's like having Bill Clinton make Albert Fish sound like a fucking scholar. And I resent giving Marjorie Taylor Greene credit because she doesn't deserve it. But in a very indirect way, Marjorie Taylor Greene does represent one thing: a radical opposition towards Israel, especially in a time where it is inescapable that Israel is committing a genocide. If anything, this should be a wake-up call to either the Democratic Party establishment or people who are still voting blue no matter who. You should, at this point, abandon the Democratic Party. No, this does not mean that you should go vote for the Republican Party, but it does mean that the Democratic Party does not have your back. Because your donations don't match the donations of AIPAC. These politicians are in power because, specifically here, they like money. Being a corrupt and evil politician who continues to fund weapon manufacturing and shipment Yeah, it's a lucrative fucking industry. And if that morally shakes you to your core, it should. And I think that if I have these really strong words about how spineless the Democratic Party is, the answer to whether or not you should condemn Israel should be a resounding yes. Because Israel doesn't give a fuck about the hostages that they're allegedly trying to rescue from Hamas's capture here. No, the only thing they care about is their so-called Balfour Accord. They care about taking over Gaza and the West Bank. They care about taking over Syria. They want to take over Iran. They want to take over the whole Middle East so it can be a fucking nation state that is run on empirical fuel.
On the one hand, a bright blessing, a future of hope. On the other hand, a dark future of despair.
The Israeli government is not ignorant to how absolutely lucrative the oil reserves in Iran are. You have to think big picture here. And I think that every single time that you try to play the Zionist game as to whether or not you condemn Hamas, if you're being filmed or recorded while giving this answer, you're providing them propaganda for content.
Go! Brain control! Under my control for one whole turn.
And even if you're not being recorded or filmed while answering this question, you are further validating the very same ideology that Holocaust survivors would fucking shake at their boots toward. In fact, let's talk about the Holocaust for a second. A horrible atrocity that should have never happened. After Germany lost World War I, the Nazi Party specifically tapped into anti-Semitic hate, using Jews as a rhetorical scapegoat to use it as a punching bag for all of Germany's problems that were accelerated by billionaires and weapons manufacturing lobbies, not Jews, to be clear, and it unfortunately led to the Holocaust, one of the worst atrocities in America, one of the worst atrocities in human history. And then can you imagine somebody asking you, do you condemn, like, Poland? The answer should be a resounding no. Poland, we're fighting back. Could you imagine me asking you to condemn the protesters of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising? No! Those people were fighting Nazis who were gonna throw them in concentration camps for them to die.
My question is fiscal. With $450 million FEMA dollars being reallocated to open Alligator Alcatraz and $600 million taxpayer FEMA dollars being used to now open more concentration camps and ICE burning through $8.4 million a day to illegally detain people, how much does it cost for fascism? How much do the taxpayers have to pay for a fascist country?
That's what Americans voted for. Americans voted for a border that is secure. And I support the president enforcing our immigration laws, which, by the way, were written by Congress.
Gee, it just seems logical then that when a genocide that is happening in current day, presently, 2025, right fucking now, in present fucking day, it should be an unflinching yes that you condemn Israel, who is currently doing a genocide right fucking now.
United States government is complicit in genocide. You have an obligation to the Constitution of the United States. I'm a disabled veteran.
There's a genocide! There's a genocide!
You are all complicit in genocide.
You're complicit in a genocide! You're complicit in a genocide! Eddie, there's a genocide! Eddie! Eddie, there's a genocide! Come on, Eddie! There's a genocide! You are complicit in genocide of the Palestinian people! You are complicit! Come on, Eddie! Eddie, help us! Eddie, help us save them! Come on, Eddie! The Israeli terrorists are committing a genocide, and the U.S. Congress and Senate are complicit in funding the bombs that are forcing children to be slaughtered and massacred.
One can be forgiven for asking why Jewish people, of all people, would even entertain such horrifying acts of genocidal rhetoric and political strategy. Unfortunately, while the question means well, the framing of such a question alone is vindicative of a common misunderstanding of the history of Israel and the broader Zionist movement. While Zionism is a belief that centralizes the Jewish diaspora in its politics, Zionism isn't exclusively a belief held by Jews. Yes, there are Jewish Zionists. Yes, there are evil Jewish politicians who reserve some of the most baffling thirst for blood that I have ever seen outside of fiction.
כל ילד, כל תינוק בעזה הוא אויב. האויב הוא לא החמאס, והוא גם לא הזרוע הצבאית של החמאס, כמו שהפצ"רית שלנו מספרת לנו שאסור לנו לפגוע בחמאסניק, אלא אם כן הוא חלק מהזרוע הצבאית. כל ילד בעזה הוא האויב.
עזה לא תחזור להיות מה שהייתה, וחמאס לא יהיה. נחסל את הכל. ייקח זמן, זה ייקח יום, זה לא ייקח שבוע. ייקח שבועות ואולי חודשים. אנחנו נגיע לכל המקומות. לא יהיה מצב את האחים שלנו, את הילדים שלנו, את ההורים שלנו ירצחו אותנו. כאילו אנחנו נמצאים במצב של מדינה, ואנחנו לא נגיע.
אישית גאה בהריסות של עזה, ושכל תינוק, גם עוד 80 שנה מהיום, יספר לנכדיו מה עשו היהודים שרצחו להם משפחות, אנסו אותם וחטפו להם אזרחים.
אמר היטלר יימח שמו. אני לא יכול לחיות בעולם הזה אם יש יהודי אחד נותר בו.
This is not a clash of civilizations. It's a clash between barbarism and civilization. For the forces of civilization to triumph, America and Israel must stand together.
But one thing Zionism is not is a monolith. That's because the vast majority of Zionists are Christian evangelicals, who all have their own belief system which heavily involves taking over the influence in local and national government, all based on their state mandate.
President Biden and I have known each other for over 40 years. I want to thank him for half a century of friendship to Israel and for being, as he says, a proud Zionist. Actually, he says a proud Irish-American Zionist.
This includes their own vision of Israel. While not all Christians, let alone evangelical Christians, believe in this prediction, there is a sect of evangelical Christianity who believe that Jesus Christ will return from heaven to invoke the rapture. This would mean that in their belief, all the Jews in Israel would be faced with an option to convert to Christianity or spend eternity in hell. The Christians believe that Israel is a vessel to eradicate Muslims and Jews simultaneously. So already Israel is politically doing the bidding of the US empire, with its support exclusively conditional to the eradication of Palestinian people. But then, why this absolutely wild contradiction? If the stated goal of Israel is to create a homeland for the Jews, so to speak, where they can feel safe, then why is American and European anti-Semitic hate and violence so unaddressed in their political system? Honestly, I think this requires us to fully understand what Zionism is. So Zionism is a fundamentally fascist ideology because of its nationalist tendencies and exterminationist output. The entire school of thought surrounding Zionism, whether you were a Jewish Zionist, a Christian Zionist, a Muslim Zionist, or heck, even a secular Zionist, the core principle of the ideology is that Jews must hold state power in the Levant region. Now, look, Jews have been historically marginalized throughout Europe for the past several centuries. This fact is true. However, for the vast majority of the history of Zionism, the issue of European anti-Semitism in the eyes of the Zionist is jealousy, not a desire to combat it. If anything, they wanted to bring that part of European culture with them. Hence the hyperbolic exterminationist statements made by Israel's political leaders.
مع هيك وحوش بشرية رايحين نتعامل كيف لازم. إسرائيل فرضت إغلاق كامل على غزة ومش راح يكون في عندكم كهرباء ولا مي بس دمار. بدكم جهنم راح تحصلوا على جهنم.
Why aren't Zionists condemning these statements? Clearly, they would hear these remarks and get outraged that evil politicians are speaking for them while advocating for genocide. Well, there has been some protests in Israel condemning the war, but those people predominantly consist of families with relatives who are held hostage in Gaza. In their view, Israel is using their families as chess pieces for a broader narrative to justify the war in Gaza and the West Bank. And while they may have opposition to Benjamin Netanyahu himself, they still believe in the nationalist perceived legitimacy of the Israeli nation-state. But other than that, why is there even an entire wing of the Israeli government whose sole function is slaughter and land conquest? Well, that's because the IDF were born out of a bunch of Zionist fascist groups banding together. So, before the late 1940s, you had the Yishuv, who were a pre-state settler community in Palestine, determined to consolidate both land and power. They weren't just defending themselves, they organized a network of militias to enforce control and expand territory, following the same logic a colonial empire would. The Haganah, for instance, served as the main force, acting as the armed backbone of the Yishuv, protecting settlements and securing land through force when necessary. And within it, the Palmach functioned as an elite strike force, trained and occasionally allied with the British Empire, capable of raids and sabotage and military operations to advance the Zionist cause. Meanwhile, smaller yet more radical militias like Irgun and Lehi took a more extremist approach. Irgun, for example, would conduct bombings and armed attacks on both the British and the Palestinian targets, while Lehi, on the other hand, operated as a tiny fanatical hit squad willing to assassinate anyone who stood in the way of Zionist expansion. Together, these militias weren't fighting for independence, they were actually laying the foundation for a military state built on occupation, terror, and systemic displacement of Palestinians. During this time, the Zionist leadership was focused not just on securing land, but pursuing economic and political strategies by any means necessary to grow their settler empire. One of the most damning examples of this is the infamous Havara Agreement.
Oh, fuck. I can't believe you've done this.
The Havara Agreement arose from negotiations between Zionist leaders and Nazi officials. Let me repeat that for those in the back. Zionist leaders and Nazi officials were having a negotiation. You know, the thing you're not supposed to do with Nazis. Get on their level. The Havara Agreement facilitated the immigration of Jews from Germany to mandatory Palestine, while simultaneously boosting the German economy. Jews, already heavily segregated and persecuted in Germany, would deposit their assets into German banks, which would then transfer a portion of that wealth to Palestine. What the Jewish immigrants were able to withdraw helped fund to grow the Yishuv settlements. In effect, the deal served both the Nazis by ethnically relocating Jews and the Zionists by consolidating political and economic power in Palestine. It is an incredibly shameful chapter in history. As Nazi persecution of Jews in Germany intensified, Zionist leaders pursued the Havara Agreement, facilitating immigration to Palestine while simultaneously benefiting the German economy. While the militias themselves were not directly involved in negotiating with the Zionists, this period illustrates the morally fraught choices made by the Yishuv leadership to consolidate power and resources. It is clear then, when the empire decries anti-Semitism in response to the scrutiny of Israel's actions in Gaza and the West Bank, it is not rooted in genuine anti-fascism.
During your speech, you made a lot of references to Jewish people as well as certain people in your audience, not Jewish people in general, but certain people, especially in your audience, to Nazis. Now, that is extremely offensive when certain people are German. And they're also extremely offensive to people who've actually suffered under Nazi rule.
I don't respect that anymore. I really don't. I don't like and I don't respect the crocodile tears the crocodile tears. No, allow me to finish and allow me to finish. Listen, sir. Allow me to finish. Sir, I don't like to play before an audience the Holocaust card. But since now I feel compelled to. My late father was in Auschwitz. My late mother, please shut up. Every single member of my family on my father's side,
the Jews did not take arms against the
my
Germans.
late father was in Auschwitz concentration camp. My late mother was in Majdanek concentration camp. Every single member of my family on both sides was exterminated. Both of my parents were in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And it's precisely and exactly because of the lessons my parents taught me and my two siblings that I will not be silent when Israel commits its crimes against the Palestinians. And I consider nothing more despicable than to use their suffering and their martyrdom to try to justify the torture, the brutalization, the demolition of homes that Israel daily commits against the Palestinians. So I refuse any longer to be intimidated or browbeaten by the tears. If you had any heart in you, you would be crying for the Palestinians, not for what's been done.
This history casts a long shadow. In 1948, the Haganah, Palmach, Irgun, and Lehi were integrated into what we know today as the Israel Defense Forces, or the IDF, creating a state apparatus built on occupation and military control. The connection to the Yeshuv's strategic consolidation, thanks to the help of the Nazis, is unmistakable. Why aren't Zionists condemning this? I mean, why would the Zionists make dealings with the Nazis? Isn't that the same as striking a deal with the devil himself? Well, there are two minds here. On the one hand, you have David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of what would eventually become the Israeli nation-state. His approach to building the empire was more pragmatic, with an emphasis on soft power. In his eyes, the Havara Agreement was a means to protect Jews in Europe as fast as possible. He wanted to immigrate Jews out of Europe, but this in turn helped the Yeshuv build the empire and consolidate power. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got Ze'ev Jabotinsky, a Napoleon Bonaparte wannabe with a much more forceful approach to land expropriation. You see, Jabotinsky based his entire ideology on what he calls the Iron Wall strategy. In his view, coexistence and solidarity with Arab people in the region was impossible. This meant that he believed the Yeshuv needed to be a force to be reckoned with toward the Palestinians, and particularly the British, who had control of the region at the time. In my opinion, Israel was born entirely out of a desire to wield the same logic and coercive violence that builds empires, whether through soft power or sheer brute force. It was all applied here against others. Now, before I continue, we need to clear the air on David Ben-Gurion. He's often cited as a socialist, as Ze'ev Jabotinsky would be closer to what we would recognize as ideological fascism, but it's inaccurate to regard Ben-Gurion as anything resembling a Marxist. He was not the slightest bit concerned with a global proletarian struggle against capitalism. His labor politics were all about nation building. Instead of expropriating the means of production, he focused on expropriating land for the Yeshuv. Nationalist interests first, socialist interests second. This is why you don't see nerdy Marxist book clubs geeking out about him. He did zilch to advance the broader socialist movement. His efforts were purely in service of building the empire. So at the end of the day, whether you take a liberal or more corporal approach to Zionism, the result is the same: the ethnic displacement and the removal of Palestinians. Both approaches are rooted in the same logic: erasing people who are indigenous to the land, which is hilariously ironic given how many liberal Zionists argue that they themselves are indigenous. Absolutely silly reasoning. While leftist movements today claim solidarity with indigenous struggles, in the case for Israel, most of us smell bullshit. Case in point, the so-called father of Zionism, Theodore Herzl, drafted a letter to Cecil Rhodes in 1902. Here's part of what he had to say. In fact, all things considered, you're the only man who can help me now. You are being invited to help make history. That cannot frighten you, nor will you laugh at it. It is not in your accustomed line. It doesn't involve Africa, but a piece of Asia Minor. Not Englishmen, but Jews. How then do I happen to turn to you, since this is an out-of-the-way matter for you? How indeed? Because it is something colonial, and because it presupposes understanding of a development which will take 20 or 30 years. So, Herzl was, in every practical sense, flattering a man who had displaced tens of thousands of Africans to build a mining empire, so much so that he literally used the word colonial to appeal to Rhodes' ego and his coal-black heart. Rhodes would eventually pass away 2 months later, never reading the letter. It is laughable to claim that Zionists are indigenous to the Levant. Yes, Jews lived in Palestine before the Zionist project, but they coexisted with Muslims in relative peace. To claim that they were holistically indigenous is a far cry from history, especially when even the so-called father of Zionism himself openly acknowledged that his vision was a colonial endeavor. Now it's time to play Are They Indigenous? I'm your host, Skylar Salvo. Here's our first round. Remember Vladimir Jabotinsky? Yeah, where do you think he was born? If you guessed C, you're correct. He was born in Odessa in 1880. For such an indigenous Zionist radical, basically a Max Stirner wannabe with those glasses, I mean, come on now. Why did he die in the US state of New York then? Okay, settle down. But what about Benjamin Netanyahu, the current Prime Minister of Israel? Where was he born? Unfortunately, he was born in what is presently called Tel Aviv, born right as Palestinians were being driven out of their homes. Pretty indigenous timing if you ask me. Alright. But look, what about Benjamin Netanyahu's father, Benzion Netanyahu? He's widely regarded as an Israeli historian, so perhaps this would imply that he's indigenous since he was born in 1902, 46 years before the Nakba. So then, where was he born? Actually, it's none of the above. Turns out he's not even from the Middle East, but from Poland. So much for those deep roots. This isn't just a relic of the past. Even today, defenders of Israel twist history, flirt with fascistic logic, and deflect criticism by crying anti-Semitism. Take Elon Musk, for example. In November of 2023, he endorsed an anti-Semitic tweet claiming that Jewish communities were promoting, quote, the exact kind of dialectical hatred against whites that they claim to want people to stop using against them, end quote. Musk replied, "You have said the actual truth." The backlash was predictably immediate. Jewish organizations, including the Anti-Defamation League, condemned the comment as indisputably dangerous, as it was a promotion of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Elon Musk later apologized, claiming it very foolish, and admitted that he had handed a loaded gun to all those who hate him. I don't know how sincere this apology truly is, but that's just my opinion. Because wait, there's more. During Donald Trump's 2025 presidential inauguration, Musk, the richest man on Earth while simultaneously destroying our government, performed a Nazi salute multiple times, and the ADL responded. This is a delicate moment. It's a new day, and yet so many are on edge. Our politics are inflamed, and social media only adds to the anxiety. It seems that Elon Musk has made an awkward gesture in a moment of enthusiasm, not a Nazi salute, but again, we appreciate that people are on edge. In this moment, all sides should give one another a bit of grace, perhaps even the benefit of the doubt, and take a breath. This is a new beginning. Let's hope for healing and work towards unity in the months and years ahead. Yeah, a lot of grace given to the man who responded, "Thanks guys, LOL." Sure didn't age well when he programmed Grok to say that he was Mecha Hitler. But at this point, you might think, okay, someone who is this obsessed with anti-Semitic gestures and conspiracy theories probably isn't a fan of Israel. But here's the kicker. In September of 2023, Elon Musk met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at a Tesla factory in California. Later that year, he visited Israel and toured a kibbutz that had been attacked by Hamas during the October 7th attack. Benjamin Netanyahu invited Elon Musk to attend his address to the United States Congress in July of 2024. And in December of 2024, Israeli President Isaac Herzog called Elon Musk to discuss a resolution to the Gaza war hostage crisis. You know, instead of the families of the fucking hostages, yeah, I'm just gonna reach out to the richest man in the world who has the questionable history of spreading anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Yeah, Israel, real safe haven of the Jews. More like real safe haven of ideological fascists. Hey, this is editing phase, Skylar. I apologize for the lighting. It's 3 a.m. right now. Don't worry, I actually did get some sleep last night. But while I was making this video, I found something that was pretty interesting. Elon Musk has actually not stopped retweeting Nazi tweets. In the last 24 hours while I was making this video, he's actually retweeted Nazi talking points about Great Replacement Theory. Where was the caution about him being dangerously anti-Semitic? Yet this is the same guy, the richest man in the world, that Jonathan Greenblatt, aka the ADL, are running to defend when he did a Nazi salute during Donald Trump's inauguration. This particular pattern, endorsing anti-Semitic rhetoric while also publicly supporting Israel, perfectly illustrates the normalization of extreme ideas under the guise of defending a nation state. It's a tactic designed to shut down scrutiny of Israel by equating any critique of Israel and the Zionist project as anti-Semitism, while also doing plenty of favors for actual anti-Semites. Which brings us to Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the ADL itself. Greenblatt has expressed a full-throttle hatred of anti-Zionist activism, even going as far as to equate the opposition to Zionism with the opposition to intermarriage.
Is it your sense that Jewish people are getting complacent, that they're not engaging to degrees and levels we should be?
I have met a lot of October 8th Jews for whom the massacre on October 7th was a wake-up call. I've met a lot of people who feel much more galvanized, much more organized. But that will only be sustained if we offer them, ways to participate in a real and robust way in Jewish life.
Mm-hmm. And whose responsibility is that? In essence?
All of ours.
Yeah.
But this is why we need a revolution in our community on so many levels. So look, the reality is that intermarriage rates continue to go up. Assimilation continues apace. And look, I fight anti-Semitism. That is my job.
Right.
But I worry a great deal about broader questions of Jewish identity, as I think we talked about over lunch.
If we are to assume in good faith that he opposes anti-Zionism using this opposition to intermarriage as a stand-in, that's wild. I mean, are you kidding me? The ADL website itself exposes the absurdity of anti-race mixing movements, dedicating an entire page to it. White supremacists fear and hate the concept of multiracial couples, relationships, or families, believing that such relationships pollute the pure white race. As a result, a fairly common white supremacist symbol depicts a multiracial couple or family with a red circle bar superimposed over the depiction, indicating that such relationships ought to be prohibited.
Shmuel Eliyahu, he's the chief rabbi of the holy city of Tzfat. And in 2010, he organizes hundreds of chief rabbis in the country to issue an edict that forbids Jewish people from selling or even renting apartments to non-Jews. It's not just what he says. This is someone who is paid by my tax money, and frankly, your tax money too. So he forbids Jews from renting apartments to non-Jews, and then outlines the reason why. He says, because it causes the public to commit the sin of mixed marriages.
We have the story of Mahmoud and Moral. Now, Mahmoud is the son of Muslim citizens of Israel. Moral, the daughter of Jewish citizens of Israel. They fell in love with one another, decided to get married and spend their lives together. The day that they chose to celebrate their union with their family and friends, unfortunately, instead of being able to spend those moments cherishing that time, he had to end up going to court on the day of his own wedding because Benzi Gupstein of Lehava took their wedding invitation and he distributed it again on his racist networks and invited all his frenzied followers to come out to their wedding and protest. Mahmoud went to court, appealed to the judge, please stop this. She didn't see fit to do so. The wedding went ahead and so did the protests. And you had hundreds of Israeli Jews outside the wedding hall screaming, Mavet la'aravim, death to the Arabs. One of the signs that was being held up and one of the chants that was going on is Hitbolelut hi shoah la'am ha'yehudi. Intermarriage is a holocaust for the Jewish people.
Another top rabbi in the country, also state-sponsored, Yitzchak Shapira, author of the King's Torah, and he puts out, similarly, another publication, but he intends it for soldiers, and he writes there, while you are in the army, there is a war going on at home. If someone tempts Jewish women, figure out for yourself what is the most correct thing to do. In other words, if you see on the street Jewish women and non-Jewish men talking to one another, bust that up. And I can't tell you outright to get physical, but hint, hint, you wink, wink, you know what to do.
Greenblatt. Do you see this black and white photo of protesters holding signs reading race mixing is communism? That's basically you now, except your version is opposition to Zionism is the same as opposing intermarriage. What a fucking clown.
You're so dumb. You are really dumb. For real.
Now let's get into the truly baffling and disturbing case that shines a light on the patterns that we have been talking about. Meet Sykal Chadha, the acting U.S. attorney for Nevada, who is the very same person who essentially handed Tom Alexandrovich, a senior Israeli official, an express ticket out of some serious legal trouble. In August of 2025, Alexandrovich was arrested in Las Vegas for attempting to solicit a 15-year-old girl for sex. Pretty serious stuff, right? But Chadha stepped in and transferred the case to local courts, a move that would dramatically soften the legal blow. 2 days later, Alexandrovich was released on a $10,000 bond and then flew his ass back to Israel. No trial, no accountability. And what's worse is that his pedophile ass is saved.
An Israeli official made a virtual court appearance for charges in a local sex sting. Prosecutors say Tom Alexandrovich used online platforms with the intent of meeting a minor in Las Vegas. His attorney argued there have been no reported incidents since he posted bond and was released last month. He also said he willingly took a polygraph test and passed it. The judge ordered Alexandrovich not to have contact with any minors. He is due back in court on October 6th.
This obviously sparked outrage, and rightly so, because Chadda's actions reveal a disturbing pattern here. High-ranking officials are enjoying impunity, cushioned by political connections and ideological sympathies. And what better example of that than to call Chadda's own political background? She was appointed by Donald Trump in March of 2025 as Nevada's top federal prosecutor. She was never confirmed by the Senate, by the way. So then, legally speaking, she's not even supposed to have that political position to begin with. Yet she still intervened to help Alexandrovich, all while publicly attacking anyone who criticized Israel. During her 2022 campaign for Nevada Attorney General, Chadda released an ad called Stop Ilhan Omar, packed with inflammatory messages and portraying the Minnesota representative as a threat.
I'll stand up to Ilhan Omar and take her team to court for defunding our police, opening our borders, and teaching our kids to hate each other based on the color of their skin.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
I have no memory of Ilhan Omar ever doing any of these things that Chadda claims, but at least Omar has never helped a pedophile walk free after attempting to rape a child. The Alexandrovich case, paired with Chadda's action and rhetoric, isn't just shocking, it's a textbook example of how extremist behaviors gets normalized when it exclusively serves the nationalist interest. Power without accountability breeds exactly the kind of abuses this story lays bare. Why aren't Zionists condemning this? Because when is a US attorney letting a powerful predator walk free, or political operatives weaponizing ideology, we see the same pattern. But this isn't confined to just government actors. Take Ethan and Gila Klein, for example. Ethan has harassed Hasan Piker for years, with literally hundreds of mentions in his Instagram stories alone in 2025, while simultaneously suing women of color content creators for what he claims to be copyright infringement. But the so-called copyright infringement takes place in videos where they're criticizing Ethan Klein. So you know what that's called, right? When you take a video for the purpose of criticizing it and putting it in your own video? There's a word for it. I'm trying to figure that out. What is it called again?
Hi there. My name is Ethan Klein, and my favorite hobby is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on lawyers.
Ethan claims to support Palestine, but his wife Gila previously served in the IDF and has claimed herself to have participated in raids in the West Bank. Operations, by the way, that are illegal under international law, as those occupations themselves violate international statutes.
What was your role in the military?
At first, I was given a role that was like in an office somewhat close to my house in Tel Aviv. And it was kind of like going to a day job in an office. So my job was to, like, when they send officers or like people to go serve, I had to like logistically help with like their hotel or a room, things like that. But it was all on the computer. It just felt like some computer thing.
Right, okay.
And it was super boring and I really hated it. So I tried to change my role. And it was something like you can apply for it and it's a form that you fill out and then they're going to give you something else, completely random.
Different
you have no
position,
idea.
different post,
Yeah.
different location.
I filled out that form and I tried it and then I somehow ended up in a better place that I liked a lot more. It was kind of like just more of an adventure, more of a different experience that I preferred than to just go to a boring job. I was in Duchifat, which is like a brigade, I guess, that's in charge of the area of Ramallah. And that brigade has like a main officer. So I was his secretary.
The International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice are actively investigating Israeli officials for such actions. But Hasan Piker is one of the few media figures covering the genocide in Gaza with care and precision. He consistently identifies anti-Semitic tropes across the political spectrum, from leftists, fascists, and even Zionists. And he refuses to even use euphemisms, calling what is going on in Gaza a genocide. In one stream, Hasan has said,
any kind of violence that Israeli settlers or the Israeli military experiences in the West Bank is literally legal, okay? It is legal resistance against an occupying military force. Israel is actually engaging in an apartheid, which is a crime in and of itself. Israel's doing a genocide in Gaza and an apartheid in the West Bank. 2 crimes in and of itself. Every type of armed resistance against both the settlers and also the Israeli occupying force in the West Bank. Doesn't matter if it's your favorite podcasters like Wife that participate in these raids. The violence that the Palestinians engage in an act of resistance against this illegal occupying force is literally legal.
And Hasan is right. Under Chapter 7 of Article 51 in the UN Charter, armed resistance is recognized as legal until the Security Council acts to restore peace. This includes situations involving UN member states like Israel, even with the Security Council powers, such as the United States, routinely vetoing measures that would end the occupation. No wonder the genocide hasn't stopped yet. But while Hasan's statement does not name Hila Klein directly, his words were widely interpreted by the likes of Destiny and the Kleins themselves as applying to her own involvement in the West Bank raids. This misrepresentation of international law was used to frame Hasan as advocating for violence against Hila Klein. Ironically, it shows the willingness of some pro-Israel commentators to weaponize legal interpretations and public statements to deflect criticism and target critics, rather than addressing the realities of the occupation and the resistance to that occupation. In response, Destiny actually gave a real death threat. I honestly think that you could perfectly justify attacking/killing Hasan IRL for statements like this. This is a disgusting double standard between support for Israel and opposition to genocide, and it's by design.
His Canary Mission subreddit community is reporting to the FBI with receipts of the FBI report. Still up with 2.6K upvotes. Yeah, once again, I'm a very visible, very sizable leftist content creator, a progressive content creator, a socialist content creator in the Trump administration. I've already had brush-ins with the law, as you all know. They're actively trying to get the attention of the Trump administration to engage in some kind of prosecution. Now, of course, because this is such a ridiculous thing that they're doing, I doubt that even the Trump administration is going to take note from this and be like, wow, I can't believe he said that people who are engaging in an illegal raid are actually can receive violence in retribution, and it's actually legal for the occupied to do so in the process of that raid. I don't think the FBI is going to find that to be actionable. But if they did, that would be an issue of major consequence. But it's crazy.
It's particularly alarming given the Trump administration's record of detaining immigrants in concentration camp-like facilities such as the notorious Alligator Alcatraz, and it has been the indigenous people who have been fighting these internment camps. Yet Ethan Klein, whom in the Zionist view is indigenous to the Levant, spends his entire time on this beautiful earth harassing critics of Israeli policy, rather than condemning the Trump administration for commandeering a fucking Nazi empire. Additionally, Ethan has inquired about charging Hasan with terrorism while simultaneously embroiling himself in a scandal for sexualizing an underage girl linked to the Boston bombing.
We've got some edgy material here, and watch your hands, because you're gonna get cut up on this one here, guys. You can scar me, but you can't stop me. Now that is interesting and very deep and poetic. But what's even more interesting is if we just go a couple pixels down. Boom. That's some good camel toe, girl. Yeah, nothing like making a political statement like showing off that camel hoof, girl. Yeah, let me get down with that shit, boy. Can smell it from here. Shit. Pretty brutal scars. Nothing that a heavy night of fucking won't incur, you know what I mean? Yeah. Anyway, ignoring the camel fucking that fat, juicy, juvenile vagina.
He's even considered moving to Kick, a platform notorious for far-right and pro-Nazi content. Yeah, real big fucking brain right there, Ethan Klein. But you see, this pattern is not even unique to the Klein family. Destiny, who has recently been outed as sharing revenge porn of underage girls, has outright laughed about the genocide in Gaza.
Honestly, I'm pro-genocide. Like, it sounds really shitty, but like, I think that Israel should just draw up its fucking borders about where it is now, and basically Palestinians can go live in another place. That's really shitty, but like, that's about where I'm at.
You just think the Palestine should just pack up and Native American the fuck out of there?
There is no mistake here. Influential people supporting Israel can engage in harassment, sexual misconduct, and extreme rhetoric and still maintain a platform with minimal consequences. Why aren't Zionists condemning this? And speaking of Trump, he defunded PBS to replace it with PragerU, the same platform that once made a fictional Frederick Douglass condemn the abolitionist movements that actually helped free people like him. He's attempting to rewrite the US educational curriculum to erase chapters that don't make the country look good, like African slavery, race riots, and Native American genocide. He's accelerated the stripping of trans people's basic human rights and deployed the military in both Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. He's even referred to Jewish bankers as an old-school anti-Semitic slur, implying that Jews are sneaky moneylenders.
Before Trump, you were losing farms to the banks. Before Trump, you were losing the farms like nobody's ever seen before. You love your children. You don't feel so well, you pass away, you leave everything to your children, and they have to pay a big estate tax, or a death tax as we call it, and they couldn't do it. They go out and borrow money, and all of a sudden the bank is foreclosing on the farm. Not going to happen. You have no more estate tax, you have no more death tax to pay. But if you love them, or if you love somebody that you're leaving it to, think of that. No death tax, no estate tax, no going to the banks and borrowing from, in some cases, a fine banker, and in some cases, shalaks and bad people.
There they are! Eggman's robots!
Leave them to me, Sonic.
As President of the United States and Israel's biggest supporter, this arguably represents one of the most damning and disgraceful forms of anti-Semitism in recent years. Why aren't Zionists condemning this? Because it reeks of the same fascist air as in 1939 when the Franklin D. Roosevelt administration denied Jewish refugees fleeing the Holocaust. American history is riddled with anti-Semitic policies such as the Anarchist Exclusion Act of 1903, which disproportionately targeted Jewish refugees escaping pogroms, and now, when Israel is bankrolling a genocide, suddenly the United States claim to have a legal stance against anti-Semitism? Why aren't Zionists condemning this? And yet somehow, Israel wants to paint itself as the bastion of progressive politics, but you can't even have same-sex marriages inside of its own borders because its government is a theocratic apartheid state. IDF soldiers, by the way, even use outing queer Palestinians as a weapon against them when terrorizing their communities. This is bullshit. You mean to tell me that these pasty-ass fuckwads, with the help of the British, the United States, and suspiciously Germany, invaded the Levant and slaughtered anyone who didn't immediately assimilate to their nationalist agenda, and somehow these fucking creeps are indigenous to the region? God. Before I go, I need to say this like a prayer. Even though I'm not religious, why isn't there more outrage? And I know this may be silly, but there is one voice in particular I wish were louder. Moist Critical. I made a video in 2022 criticizing him, but this is separate from that. To his credit, Critical has grown more politically engaged since I made that video, and I don't think it was the direct result of that video, but he's been covering the Epstein case with real intent and enthusiasm. He's been sharp about how powerful people buy their way out of accountability.
It's very suspicious. I think anybody that's activating neurons should be able to tell you that something smells very fishy here. Instead of releasing the Epstein files, which it seems like is never going to happen here, which has gone through the craziest song and dance. It's been like 10 seasons worth of plot twists in regards to that from this administration. First, they're going to release them day one when Trump's in office. Next, they're coming. Next, they're on Pam Bondi's desk. Next, turns out it was a figment of everyone's imagination. It was a made-up boogeyman. Everyone just fucking, ayahuasca tripped and envisioned these files, but they were never actually real. No such thing as the Epstein files. Then, no, the Epstein files are real, but they're a Democrat hoax. Next, the files are compromised, so instead we're going to Maxwell directly to get all the names and dangling a pardon in front of her face. Now, all of this happening behind closed doors, by the way, this conversation with Maxwell, whom I imagine will be squealing and singing any names that the administration wants her to, omitting the ones they don't want her to say, and saying whatever names they'd like to put in her mouth. And now, all of a sudden, she's just being transferred to a very minimum security prison that sounds almost like a summer camp.
And I know you care about injustice, Charlie, but why not this one? When it comes to Palestine's dying flame, the silence isn't just disappointing, it's a silence that feels complicit. And the parallels are glaring. Epstein's crimes matter. Children suffered horrific abuse, but at the same time, hundreds of thousands of Palestinian children are starving, and they're dodging drone strikes funded by our taxpayer dollars. And coincidentally, many of the same elites who orbited Epstein also bankroll and or defend Israel's genocide.
Here is the list. These are the names of children published in the Washington Post today that have been killed by the Israeli military in Gaza. The United Nations reports that more than 18,000 children have been killed since this war began. And I should mention that more than 12,000 of these children were under the age of 12, and more than 3,000 children in Gaza have had one or more limbs amputated. The American people are seeing miles and miles of rubble where cities and towns once stood. They're seeing innocent people being shot down while they wait online to get food while they are starving. Over 1,000 people have been killed waiting online to get food because they are starving. The United States has provided more than $22 billion for Israel's military operations since this war began.
Different crimes, same network of power, shielding perpetrators. So when Critical can rage at Epstein's impunity, but stay silent about Palestine, that isn't neutrality, it's complicity. And maybe that's not what he intends, but his actions speak louder than his words. Yet, for all their differences, Critical and Hasan Piker share one thing that is very real. They both love One Piece. And I cannot think of a story that frames this moment more clearly than One Piece itself, a saga about liberation from tyranny. In the mid-2000s, we watched the Ohara tragedy, an island erased by a buster call because scholars uncovered truth that threatened the world government's legitimacy. And here we are, 20 years later, watching Egghead Island face the same fate for the same reason. This time, we're shown the ideology behind the slaughter. Enter J. Garcia Saturn, one of the 5 Elder Stars. He believes ordinary people are vermin to be crushed.
The collective punishment, as he put it, of the Palestinian people. And I want to talk about that in the context of the blockade and keeping fuel out of Gaza. I just wonder if you think that that is really necessary.
You know, I'm very puzzled by the constant concern which the world and also Britain, I must say, Mark, is showing for the Palestinian people, and is actually showing for these horrible, inhuman animals who have done the worst atrocities that this century has seen.
Listen to me, Buccaneer boy. You will live as a slave, then you will die. That is your lot in life. Your fate has been decided by the course of history.
I want to protect people from suffering. I want to free as many slaves as I can.
This is why your people need to be eliminated.
If you want a deeper dive into all of this, the YouTube channel Big Dad has done an excellent breakdown on how all of this mirrors Gaza. But that's the thing. If you can watch One Piece, a story about liberation, tyranny, and freedom, and not feel your soul enraged about Palestine, you didn't actually understand One Piece. And frankly, you don't even really need One Piece to understand this. Anyone with a conscience can look at Gaza, homes desecrated by soldiers, food aid blocked at the border, AI being used to murder children, human bodies turned into shields, the incineration of libraries, schools, hospitals, mosques, churches, places of cultural memory, all paired with language reducing Palestinian life to insects. And you can recognize unambiguous evil from a mile away. Read the record for 20 minutes and you'll see why Israel is not a democracy, but an apartheid state, a colonial project that deserves pariah status until it collapses. Even if you're Jewish or an advocate for Jewish liberation, you owe that cause the honesty of opposing Israel's crimes. Because any movement that smears its Jewish critics as self-hating isn't protecting Jewish people, it's protecting power.
You are part of the new self-hating Jew. You're
what do you mean
bad
self-hating Jew? What do you mean self-hating Jew? I love that.
You are
I
a
can't get
Jew
enough
who
of
is
it.
anti-Israel.
History shows the truth. Zionism didn't win its legitimacy through solidarity with the oppressed, but exclusively through alliances with authoritarians. That bargain has never safeguarded Jewish lives, and the so-called two-state solution, it isn't a solution. Given Israel's colonial endeavors, it is a waste of your fucking time. Dismantling apartheid doesn't mean stripping Jewish people of dignity, self-determination, or grassroots power. If anything, it is the one thing that is needed to make that a reality. Israel's occupation and its routine move to label scrutiny as anti-Semitism doesn't fight anti-Semitism, it only fuels it. To commit genocide in the name of Jewish people, a people who have endured centuries of persecution, is some real Arlong shit. Tyranny dressed up as protection, oppression disguised as order. So it is your moral duty Now more than ever, to oppose this bloody empire, the human soul cries for liberation, and silence in this moment is complicity. We need to get to a point where we stop hiding from the word genocide. Israel is committing a genocide. We are funding a genocide. Our government, the United States, is built on genocide, and it is only repeating its own roots. I can understand why these AIPAC-paid Democrats and Republicans aren't going to condemn Israel, because they're fucking spineless plutocrats at the end of the day.
As Marines Justice was originally introduced in the series, on one side of that spectrum is absolute justice, heralded by Kainu, now Fleet Admiral Sakazuki, and the other side of that coin of justice would be lazy justice, or maybe I should put it as disillusioned justice. This was heralded by Admiral Akiji, and something similar to the ideology of justice for the members of SWORD, who have effectively resigned from the Navy so that they could follow their own orders and pursue their own justice, their own beliefs, their own system. Kizaru is somewhere in the middle of all that. And what does that mean to be in the middle or to have unclear justice? In a system, in the real world, in the world of One Piece, labels remove the psychological need to apply ideas and experiences to how we perceive the world. In a system like this, in the world like this, no matter how much it is insisted that these labels represent the truth of the world, it is actually just reduced to idealism, blended up into oversimplistic talking points. Justice. Justice is the ideology of the Marines, but as Doflamingo so accurately explains, justice is actually just a label for the exploiters to use on the exploited to reinforce their idealism, which also just happens to reinforce the oppression of the hierarchy in this world.
Before we go, I want to just give a quick shout out to some other content creators who have over the years talked about this topic and has gone into great detail to expose Zionist lies, to explain the history of Israel as a nation state, and to continue to hold the nation state and its supporters accountable to genocide and ethnic cleansing. And in particular, there's one clip that I want to show you from Noah Samson that I thought really popped off this week.
Given Bari Weiss's disgusting Zionist politics, it should be no surprise that the outlet she founded has served as a mouthpiece for the Israeli government throughout Israel's genocide in Gaza. Recently, they published a very sympathetic interview with Yasser Abu Shabab, who is the ISIS-linked, Israel-backed criminal gang leader with a demonstrable history of looting humanitarian aid and terrorizing Palestinians in Gaza. That interview was co-published with the Center for Peace Communications, a nonprofit whose board of directors includes multiple senior figures drawn from pro-Israel think tanks in Washington, D.C. The Free Press has downplayed Palestinian death tolls with misinformation, like when they misreported the findings of a UN report in May of 2024. This misinformation was immediately widely debunked, but the Free Press never issued any corrections. These people should not have careers in media or in public life, and they should be tried at The Hague for this. They should not be able to go anywhere for the rest of their lives without being confronted about this Holocaust denial, about their help in denying the atrocities of the Gaza Holocaust, and arming its perpetrators, its number one perpetrator, with propaganda to continue the genocide.
And I second that notion, Noah Samson. This is shameful.
Let's just take this example of Najwa Hussein Hajj, who appeared in CNN simply as suffering from severe malnutrition in Gaza City. So all we did is we took her name, we went to Google Translate, we took the Arabic spelling of her name, put that into Google, and pulled up a lot of local clips in which her parents were talking about what was really going on. And what we learned is that she has an esophagus condition, which is something that was even reported in English media, including the New York Times. That is a quite different and more nuanced story than the assumption that Israel wants her dead and they're starving her.
History did not begin on October 7, 2023. But when it comes to the American voters, people like you and me on a day-to-day basis, one of the many people watching this video, the answer should just be painstakingly obvious at this point. Like, no doubt about it. Many people up until October 2023 were not educated on this, were not informed by this. In fact, a lot of people were still on the fence as to whether or not this was a genocide, because a lot of people weren't fully informed on the issue. And that's by design.
So, to be clear, the big bombshell from this piece of hard-hitting investigative journalism is that Israel isn't just starving children, they're actually starving disabled children.
Instead of condemning Israel, Zionists are focusing on saving face while it is enacting one of the worst atrocities against mankind in history.
Why should the world tolerate you having nuclear weapons and not, say, Iran?
We've suffered one Holocaust. We listen to our neighbors.
Is it because of the Holocaust that you should be allowed to have nuclear weapons?
Just like how American history and all of the blemishes of race riots and slavery and genocide and exterminationist policies and all of the pillagings of indigenous villages and whatnot, you're not taught all of these things in school, and it's by design. So it makes sense that you're not going to really know about like the Nakba, because you're not going to be informed about it by design. But now that we have social media, now that we can see a genocide actively happening right now, it should be of no mistake, unflinchingly so, that Israel is committing a genocide. It's sad that I even have to do this. Otherwise there'd be a bigger effort from Israel to save those hostages. But there is no effort being made. I mean, do you really think that Israel even takes care of its own hostages that it kidnaps from Palestine? On top of numerous indiscriminate bombing campaigns, and even self-admitted errors by the IDF killing the hostages themselves. Yes, I condemn Israel. Israel's just interested in imperialism and conquest. And while it's important to recognize it as a nationalist endeavor, it's also important to not single out the Jewish diaspora, because they're not the ones who are responsible for this. You have the American imperialists who are the backbone of this entire thing, with them being on the Security Council, being the one thing that is stopping the literal end of a genocide. In a very Epicurean way, it's not that our political leaders can't stop a genocide, it's that they won't. So then it's our obligation as members of the working class to oppose this genocide and to wage a war against the class interest. No war, but class war.